So Andreas is the CEO of Proteona, a new international biotech startup using single-cell analysis to revolutionize immuno-oncology and immune profiling. He previously co-founded and led the proteomics company Ioxa, raising more than 25 million to build up the company. So this is what Proteona does. I mean, maybe we can talk a bit more about that later. But to sort of start off, really, as I said, you recently co-founded Proteona and became its CEO. How was the transition from Ioxa?
I think once you start a company, you disqualify yourself for a lot of other things. I mean, it's very addictive to start and run companies because you have a lot of impact. You have a job juggling lots of things at the same time, which is fascinating. So I couldn't imagine what else I should do.
So what attracted you to Proteona?
Actually, I mean, after Ioxa, you have to know, is a company that I started in Singapore, brought with the headquarters to Cologne. We have about like 50-ish people in Cologne. We also have offices in Boston. So I'm not completely new to Singapore, and I mean, people recognize that, and so they said, well, we heard that you're looking for new ideas, new things. Why didn't you just hang around in Singapore? And I said, what do you mean, hang around? And that was actually a real offer. It came originally from SMART, the Singapore MIT Alliance of Research and Technology, which is a huge collaboration between MIT and Singapore. And they said, well, we don't have any program or anything. We would like you to just look at young startups at IP, and well, we know you well enough, something will come out of that. And it did.
Perfect. So, I mean, how does it differ from when you started Ioxa? Because 10 years ago, I mean, was there anything particular that stands out? I mean, the community, the people.
I think starting the first company was a complete jump into cold water. Like if I think back, that time I was a grad student at UC Berkeley, and I talked to a professor in Singapore with a cool idea. 3 weeks later, I was in Singapore running a company. With all the circles in between of like, how do you wrap that nicely to my, today's wife? We are going to move from San Francisco to Singapore very quickly. And I mean, I have to give her credit that time she said, okay, I mean, try it. I'll give you like 6-7 months, and then you'll report actually if it's going to work or not. And better be clear if it's going to work or not. And after 6 months, actually, it was clear. Ioxa will be a company, it will fly, it will grow. So that was what I mean with jumping into cold water, and I think it was exactly the right decision. If you do it the second time around, I think I had my learning curves of like roller coaster experience biotech. I mean, as you said earlier before, biotech basically means things take longer, things don't work in any aspect that you can think of. And I think I went through all of that. And I mean, still, Ioxa as a company is running around, with lots of international projects. But I think I can cut out some of the roller coaster right now and develop a company that's still very young, very, very quickly, with something that is truly revolutionary.
So, as I understand it, cell-free DNA testing in cancer has been winning against single-cell testing in the past, mostly due to the technological difficulties associated with single-cell extraction and sequencing. Has single-cell genomics and proteomics now come of age, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. So, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't sit here, otherwise we wouldn't do Proteona. What we simply realized is single-cell is really working well. I think one of the companies that I really look up to and I'm pretty fascinated about is 10x Genomics. A few years ago, they were a stealth mode company that nobody knew about. What they do sounds very simple, but is actually very tricky. They take patient samples or whatever cells, take 10,000 of them, wrap them nicely in small packets, and you get very good total mRNA information then of every single cell. We saw that, we realized, okay, this is cool, mRNA data is great, but most of us have much more of a immunology, proteomics view on it, and realized, well, if you only have mRNA, that will cut your view on what's going on in the cell actually very, very short. I mean, in biology, I think there's a large community believing a lot in more molecular technologies or mRNA, and then the entire field of immunology is basically people looking into at FACS with antibodies. How you can combine that? And probably there's a lot of truth and wisdom from both. And that was clear for us then if we find a good way to combine that, we get data that is truly breathtaking. And I have to correct you, I was not the co-founder of Proteona. The technology really came from my colleagues. And originally I was the referee for their first grant. Obviously I wrote a very positive grant. Very quickly, I was their business advisor, and very quickly, 2-3 weeks later, it was clear, okay, I can as well join. I looked at it very carefully. This is cool.
Okay, cool. So, do you think single-cell testing will have a significant impact on immuno-oncology?
Absolutely. And I think you can see that, like even from the tiny data set they had there, you could tell that both single-cell proteomics, single-cell mRNA gives very interesting data. And we have many, many cases now where mRNA data and protein data doesn't correlate at all. And you can, right now, typically we look at 10,000 cells in a patient sample. And for each cell, you can really track total mRNA, high-plex information of proteins, and look at what correlates and what not. What would you never have seen if you, for example, would have run a lab based on flow cytometry? mRNA is breathtaking because you can run in a complete discovery mode. Anything that is an antibody-based technology, which is basically all of flow, you have to have an antibody first, right? So you need to know what you're looking for. For mRNA, you don't need to have that. Now, combining mRNA and proteins, you can be on discovery mode, but still actually look for the most important markers that basically define immunology of today.
So on a sort of slightly different note, you're now working in a second company that's split between Singapore, Europe, and the US.
Yes.
What's it like working in such an international atmosphere? What are the pros and cons?
The cons are permanent jet lag. I'm just back from Singapore, just means a few hours ago. And I feel I always say that. I'm just back from Germany, I'm just back from Singapore or the US. But actually, I have to say it runs very smoothly and very well. And there are some things, sure, Singapore is a small island, but a very high-tech island where you can do some things extremely fast. Particularly if you have a network, it's a close-knit network. I think there's no community that's faster than and closer, like not even Boston or San Francisco, where I lived for many years. So some things you can do well. And if you start something in Singapore, from day one, you have to think of how to internationalize it. And that's good. Germany is somewhere in between. You can start here. You can also look at what's going on in Germany. And for a lot of startups, I see they think too long of, okay, where is my market? Where are my partners? How do I reach to them? In Singapore, you have the pressure. You have to answer that from day one. And then, it became a bit of like my way of operating. So I have good networks in Singapore, in the US here. So it's just very practical.
So, do you have any advice for anyone in the audience who might be wanting to set up their own international company? Any tips?
So I don't give the advice. If you start a company, be as international and spread out your team as much as possible. That's crazy. Be as focused as possible. Rather, don't. I work with a lot of small startup companies, and typically my part is like focus more and deeper on something that you can do extremely well. If you can be sure that there's one little thing that you can do that's the best in the world, you can easily spread out to 2-3 more things. Typically, the teams that try to aim for doing a lot of things at the same time will fail. Because you at some point you run out of resources, resources in any direction. It can be money, as well as know-how.
That brings me on to an interesting point. So I understand you haven't raised a round of fundraising from VCs yet. Why is
For
that?
Proteona.
Yeah.
I have to answer that diplomatically without giving too much away. Let's say, put it like that. But realistically, second round around, I mean, running the company second time, you get some credit that probably your ideas are not too silly. So once we said what we want to do, we had sufficient money to just do it and didn't even need to formally raise it. So often it's non-dilutive money. And actually, I'm a big fan of non-dilutive money at the beginning, particularly for young startup teams. I feel again and again they're super eager to leave the university. We are having now this cool new startup. We rented one little lab and one little office. Well, this is all great, but that means you have to buy furniture, which is not exciting. And like run a lab means security, like safety offices and all that kind of stuff, which prevents you from being focused on what you're really good at. And well, some of the things you can actually do in Singapore, like running as a company in academic facilities. And I give huge credit to the people that let us do that. That's completely unnormal and I think wouldn't work in lots of places.
So I mean, you mentioned that you act as an advisor for a lot of new startups. I mean, what do you think is the most important piece of advice you could give someone wanting to start up their own biotech in 2019?
I'm not sure if I can boil it down to one thing. Probably I can describe what typically my role is. I mean, I'm not so far. I started my first company weeks after my PhD. And a lot of people laughed about it and said, well, it's not going to work. This is the long list of reasons why it's not going to work. But I'm not so far away from that yet, right? I mean, it's 10 years ago. So I still understand how it feels to be a young academic thinking of what is my career path, where do I want to go, do I really want to be a professor or want something else? Realizing that just the numbers are against you. If you are a PhD student, that you will become a professor, the likelihood is, well, small single digits. How does it feel? And on the other hand, I mean, if you look at Ioxa, it's a company that actually has a lot of very interesting components in it, like startup company, sure, but running on 3 continents, having actually a very experienced management team was, well, everybody in the management team, even at the beginning, was significantly older than me, with more track record. Well, very distinguished investors out of basically a lot of big shot names out of Europe, lead investor Wellington Partners. So I kind of got the idea also what it means to manage a pool of shareholders and investors, how much of work that is, and wouldn't underestimate that anymore. So I think often I'm in the position in between. I still can talk to both sides and can probably build pretty good bridges. The other bridges I build obviously is often Europe and Asia.
Yeah. So come on, one piece of advice. What would be your?
Man. Yeah, let me think about it. I think like often it's one very particular and one very specific advice for a company, and often a very personal one of like what is missing in that founder team. I do love diversity in a founder team. That is one of the most convincing things for me. Like I get excited about companies, even if I don't know yet the exact technology and can't claim that I'm the expert. If I feel that there are very different personalities with very different background and they work well together, that's very interesting. Because I think you have to resist this feeling of, we already went to grad school together, we worked together for a long time, that are easily teams that can be very qualified, but they miss the other part. They miss the business development. They miss to say what we try to set up here doesn't make sense and doesn't work, but we can come up with something very cool in a very short time that is something else that we have never written in the business plan originally. So this kind of teams, I'm always very keen to meet and help to get their finance or anything else.
So I was interested that you recently got involved with the life science crowdfunding platform, AccuVest. I mean, is crowdfunding becoming a more standard way to get early stage funding, do you think, for new biotechs?
For biotech, I don't know. I mean, I think it's still a very new concept. And I was looking at that for quite a while before I decided to really back it up too. In the end, it should be, because health is such a big topic. And we touched earlier on, like, how do we monetize health and who can people have a stake in that? Yes, I think that's some of the biggest problems of our time. What are like the business models behind health? Who should own health data? And people should, I mean, if people can be involved in Kickstarter and little electronic devices, why can't they get more involved in health, which actually touches all of us? And that's why I thought crowd equity funding for health is a pretty cool idea. Let's see. So we are at the, like with what we are doing with Escovest, we are at the very, very early journey. So Escovest.de made, I think, 15 or 16 smaller investments so far, trying it out. And now we got a major backing from the European Union and EIT. And now we are up to run that actually with a different financial model also in all of the European countries. Let's see. So yeah, I'm actually up to the second board meeting, which I will go to now in 2 weeks. Oh,
okay, yeah. Because I mean, it's something we've been keeping an eye on as well, and it does seem to be sort of becoming more accepted, but it's interesting.
So I was actually also just bringing up Labiotech, and the feedback was, well, it's the natural partner for us. So there will be more ideas coming, and I hinted already, like with Philip on it.
Yeah.
We have a long list of things we would love to do together.
Cool, sounds good. So, I mean, do you think funding for biotech has changed in other ways since you started IOXA in 2009?
Yeah, I mean, funding for biotech is a tricky topic. Venture capital is somehow not so close to the heart of Germans. It's very tricky to do that. I mean, traveling so often between Europe and Asia, we have to see that there are huge amounts of money in Asia. There's often very little experience on how traditional VCs are run, but we simply have to recognize that that's the new force. Like every time I'm at JP Morgan, like in the last few years, every single time, the dominating company, the companies, ideas, VCs come more and more from, well, China as well as like other Southeast Asian countries. How to integrate that, how to build these bridges, well, that's interesting. How many German VCs know the detailed strategy of a Chinese VC and can partner with them? Almost none. How many have good counterparts in the US, went to school with partners there, know how to put a deal together, have the trust, have put up deals together? Tons of them. And typically, if you want to build a VC consortium, people have to trust each other. And ideally have like repeat business so they don't screw each other. And that is between Asia and Europe, you have very, very few individuals that can truly say that they can do that.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I went to a session at Bio Europe earlier last year that was focusing on that, so I think it's a very interesting point. I think this is a good point to open it up to questions. So,
cool.
Has anyone got a question for Andreas?
Andreas, you obviously operate in very international, diverse environments, and you mentioned diversity as one of the interesting things, diversity in the technology, diversity in the team. The fact is that there are so few women on the boards starting biotech companies or coming on the biotech companies, and I would like your opinion, why do you think that is? And to be a little bit more kind of just brainstorming, what do you think if we try to enforce quota like 50-50? Just to say, I think you're one of the guys that actually, I believe, can work with women and is not afraid of them, and there are many who cannot. And you even have Wellington Regina on the board of IOXA. What do you think needs to happen? Are we losing talent? Or is it a lack of trust between men and women?
Yeah.
Or something else?
Good question.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, also a very complex question to answer, I guess. I think teams that have significant women in their leadership, that in biotech startups, it's extremely rare and extremely cool. I mean, of course, there are. I mean, yeah. Yeah, I think for obvious planning, family planning and being the entrepreneur in a biotech company is hard to combine. If I think back, like even for me when I became a father, and that was like during the hot time of starting IOXA, could I have dedicated more time to my daughter? Yes, probably. In the role of the mother, of course, that's much, much more tricky. For IOXA, I think we always tried to really put the plans of all our employees at the very, very front of what we want to do as a company. But on the other hand, we also had a tiny company, and we had 6 people at the same time in parental leave. And then, I mean, in Germany, that means 12, 14 months. In Singapore, that means, well, 2 months maximum, if even. I mean, I just try to explain the problem. I don't have a really good answer.
That's the perception because of funding. Women teams, not women teams, but if women get VC funding in far, far fewer cases. We have the statistics that there are about 20-25% of the applications, and only about 3% get funded. Do you think it's the perceptions of the money givers, VCs who are men, that these women, even if they come and say, I want, say, nah, you will not want when you have children. Is this something we have to deal with?
Maybe, I don't know.
Or are they just worse? Or are they just worse businessmen, and are they worse in science?
Yeah. Of course, this entire topic extends also to VCs or like to leadership position in science. Well, they are not equal. It's an interesting topic, and I think coming up with a cool strategy that truly works to get gifted, talented women in that driver role would be cool. Would be really great. I say that not like for some. Like, because it's personal opinion or something like that. But I think, yeah, we do lose talent. And I think...
The job of politics or the job of...
I don't know. I think it's very, very dangerous to say, okay, you could steer how the best companies are generated. I'm already very critical of like how much government intervention do you need. You need to create the ground level. But government and all these incentive schemes should stay out of like creating actual startups that become artificial companies that don't go anywhere.
It's a question for men just making space.
Yeah, I think the best you can do is having cool role models and having a few of them that truly inspire, and then let's see what happens.
I was going to say that actually. I think perhaps the lack of people say that, you know, if there's role models, women at a high level in certain companies, and that helps to kind of attract more women, I think.
Yeah.
But so, do we have any more questions?
Hi. I have a question regarding the technology you explained.
Yes.
You said that the single-cell analysis has the ability to sort of differentiate between protein and mRNA expression. Well, to sort of show the differences in particular patients, I was wondering how would that impact the patient or future therapy regimens?
Well, I think it's a platform technology, so you can think of lots of applications. The very obvious ones are the ones that are based on cell therapy. I think the most complex drug that you could think of, like injecting into a human body, is cell therapy, a mixture of different cells. And any kind of bulk analysis, well, I mean, how does that represent the different kinds of cells that you inject, and how do you follow them in the human body? Like CAR T is a big topic. If you don't have a single cell technology, how can you even think of like coming up with a real quality control of your therapy? I mean, CAR T cell therapy has such a large percentage of adverse effects. How will you ever actually reduce them if you can't characterize what you actually inject in a much, much smarter and more detailed way? And I think, sure, you can do that with a lot of single cell technologies on the mRNA side, but does it truly tell you what's going on the cell surface? And immunology, by definition, is a lot of that happening on the cell surface. So combining both, I think, makes a lot of sense. And then being able to follow these cells, not throwing away the traditional immunological knowledge that we have gathered over decades, which is flow cytometry data and cell surface marker data, and correlating that to what's going on right now, what's translated right now in the cell makes a lot of sense. And the interesting thing is, with single cell technologies, you don't need to have sample sizes of like thousands or 10,000s of patient samples in order to come up with really interesting findings. No, you need to have a handful of them and already have rich data that, I mean, I'm also careful with the buzzwords of big data and artificial intelligence and so on. But even with a handful of samples, you come up with findings that are, I think, breathtaking.
Okay, perhaps one more question before we wrap up.
Sure.
Hi, so it's a related question to the one before. So I remember more from an academic environment, reading papers about single cell analyses. What the people mostly do in the end is they just pool the data they have to show that it's true, because the variability between single cells is just so incredibly big that you hardly can ever say, oh, this is immune cell or this is that kind of cell. So how do you see that? I mean, how are you tackling that problem?
I think that's exactly what I mean. Typically, single cell data, in most cases, mRNA data. And how do you group the cells then in a correct way based on mRNA, while all the knowledge that we gathered over the 30, 40 years of like how to group immunological cells is cell surface markers. You need to have this correlation. And once you have this correlation, you can link it to all the literature that's already there. And just even that, I think, is very interesting findings. And that works now.
So I have one final question for you. I just wonder, how do you perceive biotech entrepreneurship in Germany? Is it going in the right direction, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's a really tricky question. I think if there are comments from the audience, what do you think? I would be very curious. It's like one of these questions that you ask, and I mean, I don't even know where to start and like putting in. I can't tell you.
You must have some thoughts. Come on.
So, I mean, I don't run very German companies, right? Like Proteona, what nationality do we have as company? I don't know. I mean, sure, we like our clinical labs are in Singapore. We all actually lived for a long time in California, and we all come from different parts of the world. So my problem is this German biotech. I was never part of German biotech. Sure, I mean, even Ioxa's majority of the company activities are in Cologne. But we have more than 10 nationalities. We have offices in Boston. We have people running around in California. We still do clinical projects in Singapore. We are spreading out, and we are a tiny company still, 50 people. So this idea of regional companies, I personally don't believe much into that. I mean, we are in the state of globalization, and things will come together. And the biggest changing effect is right now China and Asia, and we cannot ignore it. We have to integrate it and have to build German-Chinese companies, for example. And with all the prejudices that are right or wrong, and with all the fear of like not safe IP and overflow of money, we have to deal with it, and it's just a fact. And if you just look at the size of patient samples and clinical trials in China, that's gigantic. And then you have these other problems of like patient samples can never leave China. How do you deal with that? Well, then you have to do it somehow in China in a smart way. So German biotech company is, the next thing is then, I don't believe in like putting the regions smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think a lot of people know that, even though I typically don't try to say that too publicly, I'm not such a big fan of like supporting smaller regions, because then you have like a lot of incubators, a lot of small regions. You have to find a good story how to work together and where can you do what best, but network and build it together.
Great. Well, thank you
Okay.
very much. I feel like that's a really good point
Yeah.
to end. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.